Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who moan like a whale at the sound of a good charm. Right now we're reading every story in Ann and Jeff VanderMeer's The Weird Anthology, including this one, Kelly Link's The Specialist Hat. Oh, I'm Zach, and this week I am really interested in deep ambiguity. I feel like there's so many threads here, so many possible ways, so many stories we're told. All of them weird, but none quite settled on as the weird one. You know, like what's the truth here? And that's delicious.
Oh, get out your spider fingers, everyone. We're going to find this at the end of this web. I'm interested really in, we've been asking certain questions about the weird, and the weird seems to be changing ever since Joyce Carol Oates. Is weird being weird for weird's sake? I'm really interested in Kelly Link because she talks specifically about Slipstream. With the press that she runs with her husband, she's really interested in Slipstream, this kind of genre that's in between literary fiction and genre fiction, and the actual play in between the two. And I think part of the play is that discomfort that she wants to get across in these stories too.
Yeah, I like how you're bringing in ideas about Slipstream right off the bat, because this one to me, even if it has the markers of a kind of genre fiction story, ghosts, you know, strange creatures, perhaps,
Cats,
yes, cursed objects, spells, you know, all of these things. But it doesn't feel like it's any of the genres that this is pulling from. Or maybe I should ask you, do you feel like this is a straight horror story, a straight ghost story, or what? What's going on here for you?
That's a very good question. In an interview that I also watched with Kelly Link, when she's talking about Slipstream, she's also talking about ghost stories or stories that are weird. She's really interested specifically in weird. And she says it's got to be beautifully unspecific, the weird tale. But it has something in the story that you wouldn't expect. But at the same time, she says, I want to write to do something that's horror. It's not just having an idea that's horrible, but to give the reader an experience, to send chills down their spine. But the funny thing is, if you don't read this extremely closely, or if you don't read it twice, it's really, I mean, it's not even exactly explicit in the story. So we can say that we think we know what's happening, but if you don't read it close enough, it's easy to say that there are no ghosts at all. It's just weird. It's just weird for strange, I guess. It's just odd. But there is definitely the undercurrent of a ghost story.
The chess pieces of a ghost story, but they're placed on top of a Monopoly board, and we're not really... So one thing that struck me, I read an interview with Kelly Link also, and they were talking about books that changed them as a teenager. And this is what Kelly Link said. I was a weekend lurker in the fantasy and science fiction section of my local bookstore, eager to spend my weekly allowance but overwhelmed by the selection. I was drawn to the monsters and half-naked women on the paperback covers of Arthur Saha's year's best fantasy anthologies, but too embarrassed for a long time to bring one up to the counter and pay for it. When, eventually, I got up the nerve, I found the stories uniformly enthralling, and the bookseller didn't bat an eye. After that, I grew much more bold about what I wanted to read, regardless of how lurid the cover might be. And to me, this really struck me, was that the initial attraction to genre fiction, to fantasy and science fiction, was the aesthetics of it, was the images of half-naked women and horrible monsters. The love of the genre, the love of the craft, the love of the story came afterwards. But first, it's the visual aesthetic experience of it. I don't know if we can lay that down on this story at all, but I just thought that was a really interesting moment to share.
One of the most important things about weird tales, the love of the craft. You think about some of our buddies, you think about...
Okay.
Think about,
all right. Well played, sir.
Thank you. Chris or Virgil, they have such beautiful collections of these books, and that is a huge attraction because when they are collecting the books and saving some of these books, it's not just for the story, which it is, of course, for the story, but it's also for the incredible cover art, because so much of this cover art was by artists who were working directly with writers, working directly with Daw. So I think a big part of it is the aesthetic, and trying to keep a hold of these books, trying to keep them alive, is also trying to keep that aesthetic alive, because they're pulp. You know, if you don't track these books down, they're just gone forever. All those covers could be gone forever too. But what do you think? I wanted to play devil's advocate, and I know this is going to make people mad, but I'm going to say it. I'm wondering, how did you feel after reading this story? Because while I'm reading, I'm like, oh my God, this writing is absolutely incredible. It absolutely enthralled me. Every sentence is so important. And it makes me think of Donald Barthelme and the idea in his writer's workshop, you would bring the story to him, and as soon as he got to a sentence that he didn't like, he would just throw your story on the floor. So you have to have perfect, interesting sentences that all follow each other. And it feels in some ways that this is similar. There are so many kind of strange things about this that work well because they are put there formally. They are part of the relationship between sentences as they build up and accumulate. But after reading it, I was like, but is it really weird? Am I thinking about anything in the way when I read Arthur Machen, where I'm kind of puzzled and disturbed for a long time after? Or have I just been enthralled for the time being, read a really good story that's absolutely stunning, that doesn't puzzle me? Is it just entertainment?
That's a good question. I mean, I personally chalk up this in my personal sorting hat of where to place this next to. I don't necessarily place it next to another story we called Slipstream. Karen Joy Fowler's The Dark, which was wide-ranging and potentially featured cryptids and Vietnam War trauma flashbacks, people trying to understand who are these people or creatures living in these tunnels during the war in Vietnam. Like, to me, that was a different kind of slipstream than Kelly Link's The Specialist Hat. I would actually put Kelly Link's story closer to the previous one we read, Tanith Lee's Yellow and Red, in the sense that, to me, this feels like a kind of twist on a ghost story, a twist on a haunted house story of the M.R. James variety. But even if it's sprawling and going in many directions and oftentimes operating more on association and coincidence, we could talk more about that later, I still think that the fundamental structure here and mood here is the ghost story and the haunted house story.
It's interesting that you say sprawling. I was thinking it's almost geometrical, the way that these things relate. We've seen a few other stories in the weird where there are different elements, different kinds of styles, but this has poetry. This has pieces from an autobiography. This is a really strange story. And to me, it feels like an Emily Dickinson poem almost, where you're trying to figure out how to relate each piece in kind of like, a house full of windows. But here it's a house full of 8 chimneys. How do all of these little pieces fit together? I think we should talk about the plot, though.
Yeah. How long have we been going?
We're at 10 minutes and 17 seconds. But this is a very interesting kind of setup, and it's hard to follow at first. We have 2 twins. They give us the number, and I didn't want to do the math. They say how much they are collectively old, and I believe they're probably 7 or 8 or something like that. One is named Samantha, one is named Claire. They both have gray eyes. Their mother died a year ago. They live with their father, and they live for the time being, in this huge house with 8 chimneys. They say it's as big as a castle, and these 2 play inside. There's what do they say? There are not many suits of armor, but there are some suits of armor. So it's a huge place. And their father is writing a biography on, what is his name? Charles Cheatham Rash, this poet who wrote The Specialist's Hat. And there are bits and pieces of poems that may or may not be Rash's poems throughout this story, or may just be the girl's imaginings. But there are about 5 of them, I think, scattered throughout. Now, they are going to be taken care of by this babysitter who they can't tell if she's the same age as they are or if she's really an adult. Their father is going out on a date in the woods, and this babysitter plays lots of fun games with them. Eventually, they want to play dead with a capital D. And they do this because when you're dead, you don't have to be scared of anything. There are so many special things about being capital D dead, but it's different from lowercase d dead, which their mother is. The babysitter keeps mentioning her past life, and she seems to live in this house. she proves it by asking the girls to go into the chimney, put their hand up into a hole in the chimney, and find a golden key that goes up into the attic. And there is I don't know if it's really a spoiler, but there is a strange element that is not explicitly stated, but if you put some things together that could be logical conclusions, you might say, spoiler, that this babysitter is actually the ghost, the daughter of the poet, because she and the poet, her father, went missing one day from 8 Chimneys, and it seems like she's coming back and getting these girls up to no good. Is that a fair thing to say, Zach, or is this going a little too far with the evidence we have, the scant evidence?
I would say you did the best job you could have with the material, considering the material. I should say.
Thank you.
But
I got a participation award.
There's a lot here. The 2 things you haven't mentioned are this haunted hat, the specialist hat.
The specialist hat,
which,
yes, that's true.
In addition to all these things, you've really honed in on the spooky babysitter aspect. I think you mentioned the ghostly butler type guy also. The father.
I forgot to mention him.
Well, but there's also this aspect of don't go in the attic. Don't go in the attic. It's like it's a Bluebeard type dynamic going on here. Well, when they do go in the attic, they find this hat, and this hat has all this teeth on it, and it spits like a cat, and it moans and chitters and says things to them. So, yeah, eventually, I mean, what can we even say here? I mean, what we learn is that this poet was on a boat where there was a magician who had a spell which was being used to attempt to summon whales, but the poet brought it back or took the spell and published it as his poem, like he plagiarized the spell, but then the magician drowned one day and the poet took back his magic chest. Are we led to believe that the hat came from the chest? I don't know. I don't know. And how does the woman in the woods who has mouths of snakes fit in with this? Is she a repetition of the kind of correlatory woman in the poet's life, who I believe he cheated on his wife with? The thing is it's almost like The Shining, this idea of ghosts in a hotel kind of trapped there, but kind of reenacting all of these kinds of events that happened so long ago. And I feel like there's a strong sense in which this family has just come and are kind of being folded into the cyclical drama of what happened here. Everything is elusive. Nothing is confirmed. And that's what makes it so frustrating, but also so like, well, the more times you read it, the more you're kind of like, oh, like the girls, for example, can't remember the babysitter's name. Well, our ghostly butler friend says, oh yes, the poet had a daughter. I can't remember her name. It's like,
and they like her style because it seems old fashioned. I like what you said about being caught up in kind of the circular rhythm, the haunting itself. The haunting is almost like a clock, a cuckoo clock going around, and the living people who move into the house get sucked up into the conflict. It seems like that is what is going on, turn of the screw, that's what's going on here. And the strange thing, I guess, for the reader is we can't tell if it's because our main point of view characters are caught up in that go around, that they are distorting our view of what's happening, or is it really happening? We can't even tell by the end if, I think it's Samantha. Yeah, Samantha is dead or not. Yeah. Because the final line says that she is, but that's with a capital D. However, they're climbing up a chimney to escape the specialist. However, it's just their father, and it's their father's voice. But the babysitter has told them the specialist can imitate anyone's voice, so don't believe if it pretends to be your father. And it's strange because we don't know if they're dead or not. We don't know if the specialist is there or not. We don't know if this is magic or not. It's similar to Tanith Lee. We were talking earlier in the earlier episode about doubt and feeling, okay, if you have to walk the tightrope between this being true and then doubting this thing, if you're walking the tightrope between the supernatural and the natural, here we just are walking straight up a chimney and there's no way to tell. There's nothing that answers this for us, whether they're really dead, whether it's really supernatural, whether it's all fun and games, and whether the babysitter is a ghost. So it leaves us in an uncomfortable place at the end.
It certainly does. And it's hard because I think at one point we're told that ghosts don't lie, or ghosts can't lie. But it's like...
can't lie if you're dead.
Like something,
unless you want to.
But that sounds like something a lion ghost would say. And also, but also the specialist, I'm not saying the specialist is a ghost, but... his whole, its whole thing is imitating the father, spitting like a cat. Its teeth are all these animals that were mentioned in the curse or in the poem itself. What did you make of this bit about, okay, I'm going to read a quote. Their father had mostly ignored Claire and Samantha since they arrived at Eight Chimneys. He never mentions their mother. One evening they heard him shouting in the library, and when they came downstairs there was a large sticky stain on the desk where a glass of whiskey had been knocked over. It was looking at me, he said. Through the window. It had orange eyes. Samantha and Claire refrained from pointing out that the library is on the second story. So we have that scene right there. Something's looking at him. But then we also get this bit about the poet, whose name I love to say, Charles Cheatham Rash. He has 2 bad books of poetry and one just okay novel whose biggest good point is that it's short. The novel's called The One Who Is Watching Me Through the Window.
Very much like The Shining, which you pointed to earlier. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. He gets caught up in... a place where everyone recognizes him, a place that he's always belonged. He seems to be stepping into himself, and yet he has existed there for centuries, or for at least generations. This seems to be the same case for these characters, because the babysitter, who is about their age, they say, at first we thought she was an adult, then we thought she was our age. They eventually share the game with her, which they never share with adults, but they say, she doesn't count because we can't tell how old she is. She seems to be initiating them into being like her, which she's probably a ghost, she's probably dead, and they seem to be dead because Samantha realizes she's stuck now forever as a 10-year-old. Now I remember how old they are. She's stuck forever as a 10-year-old. Is that because the game has been suspended for an indefinite amount of time, or because the babysitter has successfully brought them into the cuckoo clock? I love the magician element that you mentioned earlier and the poem. Yes, maybe the case, the magician's chest that's up in the attic contained the specialist's hat and contains all of these teeth. But the strange thing is, I don't believe that the magician had a hat by himself.
Yeah.
It seems like Charles Cheatham Rash might have made this hat by himself, because it's not the magician's teeth, it's Charles's teeth in the specialist's hat. Is it not?
Is it Charles's teeth? Well, it mentions all these
Charles's wife's
animals.
teeth.
Oh, is it? Well,
I thought so.
At one point, it's like, because in the incantation, it mentions all these animals. Animals I've never heard of before, but they have really cool names. But once I started right-clicking and looking up, I was like, oh, okay, this is a weird rodent from anyways, when it's describing the hat, it mentions all of those animals, teeth of this animal, and then teeth of that animal. My memory isn't good. It could have started with the teeth of the wife, or it could have ended with the teeth of the wife, whatever. But I just remember that at one point he points out that all the animals that were in the incantation are in that hat.
Can we read the poem? It's so great. Can I read it? Okay. And then I'll see if I can find that evidence. I was pretty sure while Samantha, I think it's her, wearing it on her head and it's screaming like a cat, they mentioned that the teeth also include her teeth. It's not mentioned in the poem, but I think it's mentioned haphazardly or just kind of coincidentally there. It says, the specialist hat makes a noise like an agouti. The specialist hat makes a noise like a collared peccary. The specialist hat makes a noise like a white-lipped peccary. The specialist hat makes a noise like a tapir. The specialist hat makes a noise like a rabbit. The specialist hat makes a noise like a squirrel. The specialist's hat makes a noise like a curassow. The specialist hat moans like a whale in the water. The specialist hat moans like the wind in my wife's hair. The specialist hat makes a noise like a snake. I have hung the hat of the specialist upon my wall. And I think that last line is quite interesting as well, because Charles Cheatham Rash really has, he has brought all of this baggage, whatever it is, the case, but also this poem, and also however it was he made this specialist hat. He's brought all of this back from the death of the magician, from the sea voyage, and he's kind of hung it upon his wall. However, that thing has, whatever it is, has become like a curse on the house. We've seen that again in Tanith Lee, where you enter the house and you step into the old way. You step into the cuckoo clock, and he has hung it there like a trophy, and yet he has caused his whole family to be stuck up in this trophy's past history.
I'm reminded of S.T. Joshi saying that basically in a supernatural tale, there needs to be a kind of logic, or maybe like a pseudo-logic. We need to feel like there are underlying rules, some underlying order about how the magic or supernaturality works. Do you feel like there's a coherent set of laws and rules here, or do you think, or not?
That's a great question, because it has things that are logically consistent. There is a relationship between all of the pieces. As you said, it's got its chess pieces. There is something here to it, but we can't get a definitive answer. And I think that is part of the weird, potentially, but it seems to be weird formally in the way that it's telling a ghost story. If you look at Arthur Machen, like if you think about the great god Pan, there's so much description that is not deliberately unclear. Like, we don't really know what Helen, all of these men get involved with Helen and they just mysteriously die. And we don't really know what they're doing together. We don't really know what the great god Pan was doing with Helen, or whoever that was in the woods. There's all of this kind of uncertainty. And here there is uncertainty through, maybe because our main characters are 10 years old and they're playing fantasy games this whole time, maybe because they're being misled by a ghost. I mean, that would do it too. But the author specifically also wants things to be a little bit, not just because we don't have the information, but to obscure the very experience of the ghost story, maybe, to be scared through the discomfort of not knowing whether this is a ghost or not. Because it could also be like the Stephen King story with the devil, where the devil just wanders out of the woods. And that was deeply uncomfortable because the devil is doing kind of like creepy things to mislead a child. And here is a ghost child, maybe not babysitter. And it's like, are these girls really in danger? Is it just a funny ghost thing? There's so much ambiguity to the very nature of the telling of this tale that makes it extra scary. Not just weird, but kind of deeply unsettlingly scary.
I brought this up last story about how M.R. James said in the writing of a good ghost story, you have the supernatural understanding that the audience, or the reader, I should say, kind of implicitly subscribes to, but you want to leave a little loop of a possible naturalistic interpretation. Now, in the last story we read, I said I felt like that story had closed that loop to where a naturalist interpretation was impossible at that point. This one, I think, is doing the opposite. It's opening the loop so wide that you have to second guess yourself. Like this couldn't possibly be supernatural. You know what I mean? Like, these girls are just pretending. I think your initial reading of it as, possibly it was all just a game. Possibly, it was all just people kind of imagination. I feel like you stepped into the loop much more than I did initially. But after talking to you, I think I'm much more inclined to see the ambiguity that the way it's written, there could very easily be nothing really going on here.
Does that making the loop almost no longer a loop because you don't even notice it. I guess you're just walked. That camel has walked right in, Zach. It never knew it had to get to the eye of a needle. Do you think that makes it more unsettling than the others, the Tanith Lee story? Is there something extra scary about, not really saying like all bets off, but having no way to know one way or the other? Like you said, we know completely by the end of Tanith Lee. Here we have no way to know. There's no like amount of digging where we would ever feel certain about what we're saying in this story. It's not a puzzle. Sure. It's a puzzle without the final pieces.
Yeah. I definitely think there's something maze-like about it. But so like in the sense of like, I think it's a different kind of enjoyment that we get from this one than in Tanith Lee or even more older ghost stories. Whereas, Tanith Lee, it was all about the slow revelation culminating in the moment where the protagonist is aware of their own doom. They have the monster and it's staring at their face, but it's invisible and they're going to die. This one has no such building. It's kind of just a flat structure. It's almost like looking at a floor plan of an apartment building with all these different rooms. And for a moment, we spend time in this room. And for a moment, we spend time in that room. And then you notice that there are things that are shared between the rooms, but none of them are like sequenced in a way that provides that ultimate fulfilling sense of terror. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's like a very well-written story, but it's not, I get the sense that it's not trying to do the same thing as some of the more older traditional yarns, like the Screaming Skull, for example. It seems a little bit more comfortable with just kind of sprinkling details in and letting the audience put it together, letting the reader figure out how it all fits.
Zach, this is why what you were just saying, I think is why I wanted to mention that Emily Dickinson poem earlier. Whether or not we get all the pieces to do this, whether or not we're in kind of a layout, it feels like that is part of the onus on the reader. It's like Kelly Link wants us to participate to a degree, but not in the same degree as a mystery where you get the payoff at the end. There is something that you have to construct and you have to feel confident enough in your lack of certainty or your certainty. It reminds me of the poem that begins, I dwell in possibility, P, capital P, a fairer house than prose, also capital P, more numerous of windows, superior of doors, of chambers as the cedars, impregnable of eye, and for an everlasting roof, the gables of the sky. It goes on, but it feels kind of, not that much more, but it feels kind of similar where you get these pieces that each line feels architectural and it's also dealing with architecture. The interesting thing about this is it's in 8 chimneys. That's such a strange place to be in, but it's a house that's defined by a chimney in each room, and they're so large that two kids anyway, they can stand up inside of the chimney. And they are always running around these 8 chimneys. However, we also are told, as if we're in the layout, the different corners that make up this family and make up this haunting. And we can kind of construct the blueprint of the haunting. However, we never really get to see the full house, or I guess it's up to us to put the meaning into that house. It's in possibility forever.
The connection of possibility is really interesting because play and daydreaming and fantasy play such like an upfront role in this. I mean, playing dead, capital D. And then on top of that, like, we're told at the very beginning that the girl's mother just died. And here they are like playing dead. It almost sounds like a kind of a coping strategy or a kind of way to process their grief. I guess the story isn't very explicit about this at all, but it just occurred to me that like, that's how it opens up. Mom died and now the girls are playing dead. And then the rest of the story, it's possibly just a continuation of their play, their fantasy. In Creative Writing and Daydreaming by Freud, he talks about how like play is like a separate order of reality, almost in the way that we talk about like a fantasy novel, like or speculative fiction or something like that. So like the opposite of play isn't suddenly being serious. Play is not, it's not like playful and serious. Play is the opposite of reality, cold, hard reality. And I feel like what we're missing in the story, the fundamental question mark hanging over was, is it all play? Is it all play from start to finish? Or is it play with a sudden burst through of reality, which is the specialist hat wandering through the halls. I'll read the quote. Claire, Samantha, Claire. The specialist's voice is blurry and wet. It sounds like their father's voice, but that's because the hat can imitate any noise, any voice. Are you still awake?
Zach, I'll see your Freud and raise you a Derrida. From structure, sign, and play, because this is also about play. I thought this was very interesting, and I wonder if it relates to this kind of discomfort we're feeling with like the center of the story or the truth of the story. Because when he's writing about play, he writes this: the play of differentially related elements within a semiotic system is constrained by the supplementary addition of a center, a point of presence or fixed origin, which is understood as existing paradoxically within and outside the system, as both governing the system and transcending it. And it feels like the haunting or the answer here, the truth underneath this blueprint, the truth underneath this play, we can never really know, because the center of it is both in there as they're making up all the rules. You know, you're dead, so you have to do this. You're dead, so you can't lie unless you want to. There's all of these rules, and that is part of the center. However, the answer and the truth is always outside. We can't really truly understand it. And yet it's governing the play itself. It's both governing and transcending the play itself.
So what does this mean for us? I mean, does this mean that is it hopeless to try to find an answer? Or should we relish in the playfulness of this and not even bother searching? Like, what do you take away?
Yes. Do you treat the specialist's hat like it really is your father, or like it really is a hat full of teeth out to get you? It's hard to say. What's that thing that we've come across before when we've been reading Jung? The tension of the opposites, I think. The idea of something being true and something being not true, something being paradoxical, and having to deal with that tension, and that being necessary for God knows what. I can't remember anymore. But for some reason, this tension of the opposites and being able to hold them and being able to deal and dwell, I guess, within that possibility of it either being this way or being that way, or it being true, it being false. It feels like that is a very weird thing. So it's making us feel uncomfortable, but it also makes us feel weird, you might say. And I think that is one thing that we enjoy about the weird, is this not even invitation, you're just thrust into the inability to discern with 100% certainty whether this is or is not, whether we're in this universe or that universe, whether this is true or not. I think that's part of the weird.
I think that's a great note to end on. Bob, give me more Kelly Link. That's what I want.
Zach, give me more. That's a whale.